Alright, another draft physics video. Half of the day. So I left off at about 7 minutes, and he did just go on and on the subject of the special relativity, which he says is the important one, blah blah blah. So I just thought we would go over this one more time. There's the statement by Einstein is basically, look, light travels the speed of light regardless of the speed of the emitter. So it doesn't matter whether the emitter is moving 10,000 miles an hour backwards and shoots light, or it doesn't matter whether it's moving forward and shoots light. The photons themselves don't care about the emission speed. It will not be subtracted or added to the photon speed. The same kind of argument can be understood with gravity or something. If photons were to be pulled into gravity, they couldn't go faster. So there's a special rule for photons. They don't move faster, they don't move slower, they move one speed. And so I'm taking that to mean, say if you were in a school bus and you were going to throw a photon like a tennis ball to somebody on the other side, you would point it and shoot it, and it would go the speed of light in one direction. So technically the school bus would move right into it, possibly. If you're if you're throwing it right at the back end of the school bus, and the school bus is going fast enough, let's say the speed of light is only 30 miles an hour, so we can see it, and the school bus is going 70 miles an hour, well, the ball would start heading out and the school bus would smash right into it. But let's say we could get it to go out the window. Well, it would go out the window, and instead of hitting something at 60 miles an hour or 70 and taking this diagonal path, it would go straight out and it would hit the thing I threw it at. It would just keep on its path. And so that's the difference. They're saying no, light behaves like a wrench or a baseball or anything else. It somehow acquires the momentum vectors of both objects and yet doesn't combine them into a faster speed. Somehow. But yet somehow, without that faster speed, it will go to places where it would have to have the faster speed to get there. Because somehow we've made that place not that place anymore. I'm just saying that this is the fundamental disconnect. You people are arguing from a position where you're essentially saying photons are like any other material object, and I can be going 500 miles an hour, and I can throw a baseball ahead of me, and somehow it's going 550 miles an hour, but not really. Somehow it's going the speed of baseball. And right there, in my opinion, is a huge disconnect. You can't have it that way. It can't work that way. Because we know light doesn't do what you're saying it does. You're saying it's obeying these fundamental principles of taking two momentums and turning it into a vector. Taking two shorter lines and turning them into a longer line. You're saying it's doing that, but somehow it's not doing that. It's not going to obey the rules of what that requires, which is the longer line, the faster speed. So so of course we have a disagreement right from the founding premises. And I'm saying your evidence, your mathematics, is catch-22. You can make it seem one way for one observer. If you concentrate on one observer, you can come up with enough gimmicks, and that's all they are in my opinion, gimmicks, to say he saw it do this, this, and this because he got time dilated and he got length contracted and he got somehow width contracted. But you're not saying what the other guy is seeing at exactly the same time. So somehow one guy is length contracting to 0, because that's what you'd have to do. To make the diagonal line not longer, you have to length contract to 0. Yeah. Or you have to almost 0 and then width contract the rest. And the outside observer somehow doesn't see that. Well, of course he would see that. He'd see you essentially disappear. See the experiment go away. And so, Hofladay just goes through this whole video basically emphatically saying, this all works, it all works, it all works, I say it all works. And I don't think it all works. And I played the 60 symbols video, and all I saw him deal with was the inside observer. And he dealt with it by basically making the diagonal line go away with an argument that somehow, because he's time dilated, he sees light go faster. Well, faster than what? The speed of light. That's the only thing. That's the only way you can make the longer line. That's the only way you can do it. And he's not really seeing that, because that's over a longer period of time. And so by the time, you can't match the time with the statement, because if you take that longer period of time while he's time dilated, we know that actual time kept going, and that means the hole kept moving. So the diagonal line he's seeing now, right, isn't right because the hole's not there anymore. You can't have it both ways. You can't time dilate in your brain and then expect the universe to also time dilate. That's not plain fair. And so, and again, just more of this lens transformation. Like this comes to the rescue. And again, it doesn't transform the physics. It doesn't change the fact that you're stuck with a longer line, and you just keep pretending you can make it go away, and you can't. Your premise is wrong. What Einstein said is correct. Photons always travel the speed of light. That means it doesn't, if you're going 500 miles an hour, the photon leaves at exactly the same speed as the speed of light, and you're going 500 miles an hour. So you can subtract that from how fast the photon is going to end up leaving, because you're also moving in the same direction, and there's no rule against that. But that's a fact. That's what's factually happening. You can't make light go twice the speed of light by merely saying, I'm going to go almost the speed of light, turn on a flashlight, and make light go twice the speed of light. It's not going to happen in anything called reality. So I'll just play some random bits, I guess, out of this crap, and then we'll get to the new argument. Well, I wrote some notes. I mean the video's not playing, of course. Thank you, YouTube. Let's see. You can't change where the hole is. Yeah, so that's a good point to make. Oh, okay. So yeah, I want to relate this. Piro made a stupid video. Yeah, where he's talking about his induction and deduction and extrapolation and blah 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 blah.
So you've often.
Yeah, whatever. Your idiotic notions of what I have done are also under dispute. I'll turn the speed thing off because, well, I'll reduce it to have less speed expansion. Yeah. So it gets to this whole, you can't argue a God theory. So Piro's trying to imply that my theory is some sort of God theory, and that his theories aren't full of God theories, devices created that are impervious to reason because they only do one thing. So like bent space. Yeah, obviously I can't catch bent space on its consequences and its unintended consequences, because it doesn't do anything else. It doesn't have any real presence. It doesn't have a real property. It just does one thing, okay? And being created for that one purpose. So to say the Christians didn't write a Bible, and so their God was just a creator, it would be so much harder to argue against it, because you wouldn't have all the stupid, like, shellfish prohibitions, and you wouldn't have the stupid stories, and you wouldn't have the insanity of, don't have any gods above me, other gods. Don't let any other gods in your house. You wouldn't have stupid statements by the fucking God to sit there and say, oh, come on, how can that be real? So that guy's got infinite intelligence, and he punishes all women for the sins of one woman. He punishes children for the sins of the father. Oh, please. He's an idiot. So, but if they didn't say anything, if God didn't have any personality to look at, well then, yeah, how do you argue against it? It's not as easy to argue against it. And so all his theories are all magical dark matter, blah 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 blah. They just have these properties and no other properties. So ha ha ha, you can't. It doesn't go. It doesn't make any poo, right? Doesn't fart. Doesn't do a single thing. So there's no way to detect it. It's the perfect invisible man. And and then he'll bring up the subject of religion. What a joke. A preposterous, insipid joke. And so Holiday's just doing that, in my opinion, with this. He's saying, well, our mathematics is contrived, and it is, and he concedes this perceptual argument that this is a matter of perception. And again, the argument isn't about what either person in some deluded state sees. We're trying to find out what actually happens. And there's no actually happens that works mechanically. You can't make an actually happens that works for that photon to go through that hole. It can't happen unless you violate the fundamental time teller, which is the speed of light. Unless you fuck the speed of light, you're not doing it.
But that particular idea, I think, comes under heavy criticism very quickly. There doesn't seem to give an avenue of escape, except the only thing it has for it is its ludicrousy.
Oh, no, I went too far back. That's the, yeah, he's still talking about the mathematical universe thing. The universe is made out of math.
Nima Hamed points out
1925, I guess is where I gotta go, somewhere around there.
So mathematically consistently, there's no errors. There's no unbalancing of those equations.
Okay, so he says there's no errors, there's no unbalancing, there's no contradictions that you can find in anything they ever said mathematically. I say no. I'm objecting to that as just your statement. No, the math is convoluted and contrived, and you can see the contrivations. Again, the idea that, oh no, the photon's moving the speed of light on this diagonal line, but the observer seeing it sped up because he's time dilated. Well, that doesn't change the fact that it's not going to get to this hole then.
And the mathematics of stating on the one hand what he sees, and of the same events, the other hand what somebody else sees, these observers.
Right, and they don't, generally speaking, they don't do the math step by step by step with both observers and say, well, what are they seeing moment to moment? As this light progresses, what are they seeing when the light's 1 foot away, and when the light's 2 feet away, and when the light's 3 feet away? And I think if they had to do it that way, maybe that you'd find the contradictions a lot easier.
Frames of reference, and the changing of what he sees and what he sees is Lorentz transformation.
Well, again, says you. So again, the lens transformation is just this stupid curve that tells you how much your time's going to get dilated as you increase your speed. So exactly how does that fix anything? How does this notion of time perception not being correct, that is, you don't have a clock that is accurately measuring the speed of light, that's what it comes down to. Light's the constant. Light creates time. The speed of light is what creates time. Nothing goes faster in it. The forces all travel it. So if the forces travel faster, then time is different. If the forces travel slower, then time is different. But you can't change time any other way. You can just change a stupid clock's calculation of what time passed. And again, if you're going to change my perception of how fast time is happening, that means that hole on the side of the ship is gone by the time you do your calculations for this line. Well, this line isn't going to work anymore because you've introduced time. And now you have to account for the new position that everything's in because time has passed. Real time passed. Why the deluded observer wasn't looking. Okay, shit happened.
No, I can't do it. I broke down and slotted in lots of extra mathematical insight.
Yes. Your video was absolutely not memorable. I'll say that much for it. But yes, I hardly remember it. It was probably so convoluted and jibber jabbered. So I'll jump ahead a little.
Fixed true frames of reference. Because when you tell the story and say, so I'm going in reality, in a fixed frame of reference, I'm going 40 miles an hour, I say, prove it. And you go, well, I am. My mate says, I say, how do you know that the universe...
Yeah, so that's exactly my point. My point is the only clock that works is the speed of light. That's the only reliable clock, is the speed of a force. So the speed of magnetism, the speed of gravity, the speed of light, the speed of a photon, the speed of a ton. So that's it. So yes, you have to demonstrate how your clock is adjusted properly by shooting some light. Light is the clock. And you're breaking, in these very experiments, you're breaking the clock. You're breaking the speed of light to make your math work. You're not doing anything else. You're just basically saying, I'm going to break the original clock. I'm going to break the clock that decides what a clock is. You're breaking the constant. You're cheating in the most overt way.
That you're not stationary and the universe isn't moving at 40 miles an hour. Yeah? Oh.
Again, irrelevant to the question. If the universe was moving 40 miles an hour, then we'd have to have some recognition that the speed of light is different in different directions. So that's how we would know, because we've already established the speed of light is the constant. And again, the only way you could make your universe do that is you'd have to sit there and play more gimmick games. I'm going to break the speed of light to fix the speed of light? No, you can't do that. You're just giving me the description of a brilliant cheat, not anything, again, what else besides the speed of light is the source of time? There isn't anything else. That's it.
Still sees what they see and is still limited by observations. And special relativity is a statement about the observations you can make, you will make.
Again, it's this statement about observations. Again, I'm conceding the point that you can play this stupid time dilation. Let's pretend that you're not seeing the universe, but all that means is you're not seeing it. That means your frame rate slows down. That means frames go by and you don't see them. That's what it means. It doesn't mean you're seeing more. It means you're seeing less. It doesn't mean you have more information. You have less information. And again, it doesn't update the physics. Your time dilation doesn't explain where the space went. So you have to eliminate the space. And again, even if you eliminate with contraction, any line off the center line is a longer line. So you're still screwed.
And ultimately, it turns the concrete ideas of the regular passage of time for everybody.
I'd say the concrete idea is recognizing that photons aren't wrenches, photons aren't baseballs. They can't acquire velocities. They can't adjust their momentum to different forces influencing them. They have one direction and one speed. When they land, they start at 0 and they go to the speed of light in that direction, and that's it. There's no influence, there's no wind, there's no pushing it, there's no moving it. That to me is the solid foundation.
Have to be relinquished. And even the distances.
Do it all you want. Relinquish whatever you wish. I'm saying you're relinquishing yourself to a god, to a phony, fake, contrived pile of crap. It's a wrong premise. You're choosing badly. That's your choice, to choose badly. I'm saying you have two choices here. To pretend that something that moves a constant speed is behaving just like a piece of material matter, or that I get it. The thing moving a constant speed probably doesn't have anything to do with the way material things move. Yes, okay, I get that. That's your choice.
Measured. You're quite right. The contraction itself, but just for technical correctness, I said I understood the mathematics to yield the right answer will both contract and adjust time.
Yes, it will contract and adjust time. So there, you just said it. We'll just change the speed of light. Fuck it. Alright, it doesn't work, so I'll just change the speed of light for this, so now this longer distance isn't as long, because the speed of light is now changed. The speed of light covers more distance now, because I just said so. Okay, fine. And you're saying that's brilliant mathematics. I'm saying that's just a pile of crap. You just made that shit up.
If we was to get into a bet, for example, and I show, then it would not make the hole only on time contraction. Or extension, slow.
Yes, exactly. It wouldn't make the hole because the light can't go faster than the speed of light, so it can't travel the longer distance, so it doesn't get there. That's right. That's the correct answer. Thank you.
Time slowing. It has to do both. The math does both. And they both.
Yes, right. The math does both. It has a deluded observer who's not seeing the real universe, and it contracts space, which the outside observer somehow didn't notice. That you contracted space so much because you have to contract it to 0. Like I said, the only line that's the speed of light is this one. This line is not the speed of light. This line, no line is. So you can contract all you want and you're still stuck with a line that's fucking too long.
Lovely. Come together to ensure that the light goes out.
Yeah, to ensure that our bibble-babble silly reasoning is a perfect rationalization of bullshit. So yes, you have a wonderful rationalization of bullshit. Thank you. Great. Fantastic. But that's what I'm going to call it. A complete, rationalized pile of shit.
And everybody sees it and agrees on everything happily.
Yes, and I'm saying no, the outside observer, if you don't make him completely irrational, isn't going to agree with any of this shit. He's going to say, well, you just contracted the fuck out of the ship and I can't see a damn thing. You fucking cunts, you're cheating. No invisibility cloaks, thank you. They're not allowed here in reality.
Making and still holding dear the concept of the absolute speed of light.
Yeah, well, obviously you're not holding it dear. You've just fucking decided to fuck every single variable you can to break it. And you broke it. With a diluted pile of mush.
Which are pretty stringent and pretty fantastical, which make it look like, you know, it's got to be taken very seriously.
It's fantastical and it should be taken seriously. I don't know what all that meant, but the word, I mean, it's pretty fantastical. Yes, that's right. It's pretty unbelievable, and I'd say it was wrong focused from the very beginning. You started off with a silly premise that light somehow has awareness, that the photons that leave me have some kind of awareness, some sort of essence of what I was doing when they left. That somehow they're carrying some identity from their source, and they're not. They drop into a 0 universe and go the speed of light. They don't do this, I'm carrying the influences of my emitter thing.
Right, so, you know, you've often proselytized that nobody understands inertia, but I've explained it. No, you've actually...
Okay, so now here we get to the next subject, which is inertia. I haven't played this part, but he started off with this insanely stupid premise. Yes, nobody understands, nobody pays any fucking attention to what I say in videos. It's the truth. Because you say things that just, fuck, I mean, how many times do I have to go over it? I mean, damn. So, you just, now, assuming this is now, he's got this bravado, like, I understand what you're saying. And now here's his regurgitation of what he understands that's completely inconsistent with what I've directly stated.
Dismissed it. You said there's no inertia.
There. I said there's no inertia. I said for electrons, there's no inertia. So now he's saying I'm disputing Newton, because Newton didn't talk about electrons, by the way, or protons, or quanta. He talked about material things. As I've stated, the material things have to absorb force and hold it. I've said these things. Electrons can't hold the force. They have no way to keep it. So therefore they can't maintain momentum because they can't hold quanta in a direction.
Because you said there's no momentum.
I don't say that. I say there's momentum for material objects. Things bigger than atoms and bigger have a mechanism. I'm not even sure all atoms. I don't know if you can give a hydrogen atom sustainable momentum. I haven't tested that. Small atoms might be in big trouble when it comes to momentum because there might not be any mechanism. And as I've pointed out, the mechanism is the force is in between the electrons and the protons. That's where the quanta is. And if you can change the orientation of the stuff bouncing back and forth between objects in the sense that it's not bouncing, it's always going one way, by having the material, the electrons and the protons move, then you can create an imbalanced circle in the sense that it'll have more force because there'll be more objects on one side, more mass on one side than on the other side, and that wrong balance of rotation will cause movement, sustainable movement. So yes, material objects can capture force. They can capture imbalance in a direction. Electrons have no capacity to do that. That's the argument I made. Said it over and over again. I didn't say anything about Newton's laws being garbage. Never said anything like that, never suggested that. I merely stated that nuclear bits are not atoms.
Yeah, you said
they're material, but they're like submaterial, like subatomic. They're submaterial. They're almost material, but not quite there. They're more material than the quanta, but less material than the atom. Can you understand that?
You have thrown out Newton's rule about, is it the first law, that a thing carries on in its direction?
A thing. So again, there's a material thing. Newton didn't talk about electrons and protons. I'll say that again, emphasis included. I don't think Newton thought that rule applied to even a photon of light. So I think he knew you weren't going to slow them down or speed them up.
Unless acted upon by another force. You've thrown that out and said...
So again, he's claiming he's paid attention, claiming that my argument that you fuckers don't pay any attention is bogus. And yet, here, he's just proving he hasn't paid any attention at all. I never claimed material objects don't possess velocity. I even gave examples of like the space shuttle and how the force shoots into the frickin' space shuttle and the matter actually is holding the force. That's why the thing keeps moving, is because the force went into it and it never went out. The space shuttle didn't hit a brick wall and the force went into the fucking brick wall. So it's still inside the space shuttle somehow. That's the trapping of the force. I'm saying that's the reality here. The force is a real thing. It gets held by material objects. And I pointed out how electrons just can't hold it because they're subjected to this environmental thing that forces them into balance.
Oh, no, things don't. Well, things slow down. Well, I note at this point that if things slow down and need to keep being pushed, then that undermines the Lesage principle.
Okay, so again, now he's using this as a premise for some other argument. Like, there's any real hope that I have ever said anything about Newton's laws not applying to material objects. There's no hope of making that a rational interpretation of anything I've ever said. So, you know, this reaching, I mean, it's just such an irrational perversion. For what purpose? I mean, here you're claiming my theory is flawed in some fundamental way, and yet you're reaching this desperate for an argument. to sit there and imply that I stated that Newton's first law doesn't apply to material objects when I never, ever, ever came even close to saying that. I mean, and you're saying, and you title this video, Some Fair Analysis of Draft Science. This is fair? How the fuck do you perverts, you disgusting perverts, how do you molest the word fair like this? So overtly. It's fair to say that draft science has said Newton's first law doesn't apply to matter. When he never, ever, ever, ever said that.
That you have drag. Yeah? In fact, sprinkling the ingredient of I mean, Feynman looks at the notion, the Archimedean notion, and explains why it doesn't, in principle, can't give rise to things that we can't see. Yeah.
That's vague enough not to be useful. I mean, I'm sick of Feynman, frankly, but whatever. You know, use him as you like.
Were this Archimedean notion of you know, things need to be kept being pushed is to give, instead of the Newton formulation.
Right. Now, the argument is that things, all right, is unscientific. To say things, especially with your conventional theories, right? Your conventional physics says there's 100 fucking things, different things, inside of atoms. So just the nuclear bits includes 100 different ones. And then your atomic bits is another 100 different ones. So to say things as if they're all the same thing is being preposterously unscientific. It's like saying humans are lobsters. That's just stupid. They're not lobsters. Lobsters live under the water and have their skeleton on the outside, and there's a huge number of differences we could go over between humans and lobsters. Well, there's a ton of difference between the atom and the stuff the atom is made out of, and then the stuff the little bits are made out of. That's, you have to understand, they're not going to be in the same category of properties. And that's what I have emphasized in these videos, is that these different things have different properties. And I've emphasized that the proton thing has a set of properties that revolve around this red idea, and the electron has a whole bunch of properties revolving around this black idea, and that they're filtering different things, and they're doing the similar thing, but it's different in the sense that it's almost inverted, backwards, opposite. Same, but opposite. That's what poles indicate. So you don't see how, me watching this video, I shouldn't say, holy fucking shit, what a slandering pile of crap this is. Instead I should say, oh gee, I'm so glad that Hoffa is participating and this is just so much fun. No.
Force equals mass times acceleration. He considers what it would mean that force equals mass times velocity. The first derivative as opposed to the second derivative.
Well, again, we know the distinction between these two things. Accelerations will lead to velocity unless you can't maintain it. You can't hold the force. If the force leaks out of you, if you bleed it into the environment through friction or osmosis or impact, then you won't have it anymore. So there's no absolute rule that, hey, if I give something a velocity, an acceleration, I've automatically given it a permanent velocity. Velocity can be permanent or impermanent. You can lose it because of drag.
Of distance with respect to time. And I forget how it fails, but he says, look, you know, if you're going to guess, it can be shown mathematically to be a bad guess.
Well, I'm just saying, I didn't see that clip. That would be interesting if you can find that somewhere, but I didn't see that one where he's talking about momentum, because that would be very interesting. Because in my opinion, again, this just depends on your assumptions. Now, in a universe where, in Feynman's universe, where there's no ether, and certainly not an active ether, well, yeah, it's true that you don't have a mechanism for doing this pushing. But clearly, in a universe where there's a zillion things moving the speed of light, you might be able to understand that, hey, maybe you do need these bits, these force bits, to actually keep thinking something moving. The only reason why it keeps moving is something keeps pushing it further and further and further. Something has to push it. There's no magical momentum god. You don't just get to say, I'm going, and therefore I'm just going to keep going because I have magic goingness in me. You're a thing in a spot in space. Again, back to the argument. What's the physical difference between something moving 50 miles an hour and something stationary? You're saying there's no physical difference. This one just happens to be moving. I'm arguing, there is a difference. There's a force inside this thing, and that's why it keeps moving. And when it hits something, you'll see the force. You'll see the fucking force. You'll see it. You'll see it. Realize, because you'll see it transferred into another object. You'll see the friggin' force. The difference is in it. It's holding it. It's carrying it. It's got it inside of it. It's force. It's in it. And it'll break a piece of concrete if you let the damn thing hit it. You'll see it.
Anyhow. But a lot of the problems in dialoguing with your...
No, all of the problems in our dialogue is your preposterous definition of the word analysis and fair. And I could go back to some basic other words too, that you don't understand the concept of those concepts.
Force theory. And I don't like you to use the word field because...
Yes, I think field is bullshit. That's why I'm getting rid of it altogether. Where am I obsessing on the word field? Where is fields any part of my argument? I'm not using fields except fields of force. I mean, when there's a whole bunch of force somewhere, you do have to call it something. Like if there's a bunch of corn, you don't just say, hey, it's a bunch of corn. You say, it's a field of corn.
It's a very technical definition of a mathematical model and physics model of the notion of properties of, and elemental pieces of points of space.
Right, it's just a bunch of gibberish where we just make up properties, assign them without any cause. Again, no cause. We'll just place it there as if it was always there. The number 7 was always there. Didn't have to get there somehow.
With these properties, I think the natural is how the kinetic theory of gases, the model where we think of air as a sea of bouncing balls, or water and liquid form where it's a sea of sloshing around.
Again, the place they derive forces from is part of this whole argument, is that they create these artificial virtual things like magnetism, right? They know the magnetism is coming out of the magnet. They know it's not consuming energy to have this magnetism come out of the magnet. So they can't make it a real thing like a photon. They can't make it real radiation because they'd have to explain how it was generated. So because they don't have any fucking thing creating what can get polarized, so they don't have any gravity to polarize because gravity spent space, clearly they're out of luck. And so in all these circumstances, they keep denying the existence of the actual real stuff that's out there, and they just keep realizing it's the existence by creating an invisible man to take its place instead of giving it a real identity. Instead of, let's say gremlins were real, but they were really small and you can't see them. And they were really doing shit. Well, yeah, you might create an invisible man, say the invisible man did it, because it's the same idea. You can't see it. But it doesn't, they're duplicating the thing. So just put on your I can see the gremlin glasses and then there's no problem. So just imagine the universe full of this stuff that's pushing crap, and then it all fits together. If you start looking, if you start seeing the gremlins, the quanta, then you can explain where all these forces are coming from.
Balls, and I think the word see better conveys, without confusion, the notion of this particulate.
Well, whatever. I don't care. You think so. Fine. You can think whatever you want. I think that kind of language just gets this thing more and more messy. I mean, that's what they call now. They call it the proton. No, the neutrino sea, and the what's the other one? So whatever his name does. You know. Yeah, to describe the force of the proton. So now the force of the proton is now being described as a particle C of neutrinos or something, neutrino ether or something.
Theory of forces. And again, I'll stress, that's ultimately the unified theory that you have. It's a unified theory of forces.
Of force, right, exactly. Don't even say forces anymore, you just say force. Right, it's the unified theory of the force, because it's just one. Interpreted differently, filtered. You wouldn't say because you filtered your water, it's not still water, right? It's water.
And, yeah, I think, thinking about it, that's quite good and a good achievement, and I think it's... it can't be superficially rejected.
Well, it can be, and that's all you've done, and that's all Piro's done, and that's all the commenters do, is just superficially reject it. So again, where is the like I said, the expectation? Again, it's one person with the theory who's only spent spare time, fixing it, gluing it all the pieces properly together. And you're sitting there poking at it saying, well, it fell apart. Well, yeah, I only temporarily glued it together. I mean, it's barely glued together. That's right. But you can look at it and say, okay, yes, this has got it's got everything a good theory would need at this stage of development. Now, you're not treating it as if it's got everything a good theory would need at this stage of development. You're treating it as if it's an adult and it's supposed to be able to fight in the pit bull ring and, all of that bullshit. And again, that's your definition of a fair treatment. I'm saying you're being preposterously unfair to exactly how really good this shit is. If this shit came out the same time as Einstein's shit, okay, it would have been one hell of a battle. Because, yeah, this answers all the questions, and it does the unification, and his completely failed to do any of that. I mean, it's got time dilation, it's got fucking momentum, and it's got magnetism, and that takes care of the nuclear forces. So, I mean, yeah, it's got everything a good theory would need, it's got. And its only liabilities are these little technicalities about figuring out exactly how quanta interact, is the red reflection a true momentum reflection, or is it just the black reflection that creates a momentum reflection? Little details.
It could be, again, it could be criticised that it doesn't give you the structure content and like the observations of all the different kinds of particles we see, but that's...
Well, again, they're not observations of particles, so let's not pretend they're observing particles. They're observing displacements in what they call a field. All right, so again, they'll admit that these particles, these antiparticles they've given particle names to, these antiparticles aren't really particles. They're absences in electrodynamics, in relationships between electrons. They're voids in atoms. They're not particles.
To speak of structure of things, permissible structures, and your theory, your unification of forces theory, is to turn your mind's eye away. So I was saying that the problem with dialogue with you is when the two, and you find yourself trying to stand concretely on notions that in other videos you've said, look, I'm not really going to be held accountable to the structure of things.
Again, I haven't said that. So this is another where you're saying I denied Newton. Where did I say I'm not going to be held accountable? What I'm saying is this minutia is an interesting subject of whether it's just a pattern or whether the actual things are moving or it's actually capturing force or it's just changing the polarization of what it already contains. I mean, yes, those abstract conversations are interesting about what you could do to any material universe. Any description of a material universe, you could sit there and get into conversations about what's the nature of the little bit. Once you've defined quantum, once you've said it's quantum mechanics, yes, you open the door to a conversation about what this Planck thing is. But I'm just saying that conversation is a distraction, in my opinion, because you could do the same thing to the current theory if you felt like it. And you just don't feel like it because no one's going to talk to you about it. No one's going to engage in that conversation on the current mechanics because your quantum changes, whether it's a bent space quantum or it's a neutrino quantum, or it's in the Higgs field, or it's in the booga booga booga, or it's a quirky upside down bing bong. I mean, you can't even have the conversation because your quantum is always morphing into something different. There is no quantum in your quantum mechanics, ironically. Laughably, your quantum mechanics contains no quantum. Mine does.
But then at times you will stand firmly and talk with such force to give one to think that you are standing firmly behind it's a school of fish, it's interlocked arrows, it's whatever.
There's statements I can make and say I'm 99% sure, and then there's a statement I can make and I'm 75% sure of that one. I mean, it's probably going to modify a word or two. So if I say something like it's a push universe, okay, I'm sure of that. So that's a good one. And we'll just go on from there about how confident I'm going to be about each statement about what quanta are. So if I'm going to argue that the protons are filtering something completely different out of them than the electrons, yes, I'm confident that that statement is true. That's the nature of polarization. Polarization is created because protons filter one color, one form, and electrons filter the opposite dimension, whatever you want to call it, of the three dimensions, whatever. Their function is opposite in terms of there's two ways to be, because the other way is your movement. So there's only two ways to be, and I'm confident protons care about this and electrons care about that, and that I'm confident about. So yeah, I can make statements like that. But that's all I mean, again, I'm engineering this as I'm creating it, as I'm gluing it together. And, one person's mind devoted to that purpose. One. They've had 100 years and maybe a few million people working on their theory.
Right. But all you have to do is to be clear, is to make it clear that you're just suggesting avenues of inquiry to what could resolve that, but you've not yet turned to it, and perhaps it will be of great order. It might be that it's best to...
Yes, I mean, I'm trying to do that. I mean, I'm trying to say, well, look, these are all the 90%ers, and then these are the 75%ers, and these are the 50-50ers. I'm trying to do that, but even organizing that is a task in your own mind, trying to figure out, well, which parts of this are the parts that are unassailable. You're really never going to fit. You're not going to be able to break it or make it not work. I think clearly the momentum argument in its substance, where you're capturing force and the force doesn't interact with force, might be a truth that's just undeniable. There can't be friction because what you're capturing when you have momentum is force, and force doesn't interact with force. So you can't be a friction problem.
Just say, no, don't think about the structure of those things. Yeah, there's a lot of mathematical things, but it doesn't make any philosophical sense if you start trying to think of the structure of those things. Just the way we understand that we're limited and we'll never view the Planck scale, maybe we should have given up the atomic scale.
Well, I'm just saying the conversations all have their proper place and proper time kind of thing, right? So we all know that. You have certain kinds of conversations at the dinner table, and you have certain kinds here and certain kinds there. I'm just saying, in this effort to say it's evolution, not God, and that's how I see it, of course, as that almost that obvious, that the choice made in the past were so bad, that they were just God theories. They were invisible man theories. And here we got something else we can work on that's so much more physical, physics, and simpler. I mean, it fits all of the requirements of the correct answer. The correct answer is going to look more like this than like that. Correct answers aren't going to be dark matter-ish.
Philosophically speaking. See, so that's one problem. When you talk about travel and it containing the force, this is your explanation of, no momentum in it. Has to be wholly the force, and this, that, the other. So, but again, the problem's arising by introducing and trying to reconcile structure with the force, the basic force theory.
Structure and the force theory, that's the part where, like I said, where you have this problem. Because again, you brought up Newton. Newton was talking about things in a very big sense. He wasn't talking about things in the little sense. So as I've pointed out with gravity, gravity is not affecting you. It's affecting your atomic bits. It's a nuclear force. I'll say that again. Okay, that's one of the ones I'm confident about. Okay, it's both produced and it affects you on the nuclear level. That's why you have more of it when you produce more of it when you have more nuclear bits, and it affects you in this benign manner where anything any size has the same effect on it. Well, the effect is because the little bits are what it's affecting, and you have a proportion that's exactly the same. So it's like humans having seawater being an indication that seawater in their veins. It's sort of an indication that they probably have something to do with the ocean, their heritage somewhere. Somewhere they were in the water. Yeah.
And that's where I think you go wrong, because I think you're wrong to try and get rid of the Newtonian mechanics.
Well, your premise is a straw man, and I argue it doesn't have any fair analysis. Couldn't possibly create this straw man, because there's no indication that I've ever said Newton's first law doesn't apply to material objects. What I've said is it doesn't apply to the subatomic objects. They're creating it by their arrangement to each other. They're collecting the force because they collect it between them. They aren't the force. They aren't momentum. Momentum is the symptom of the force they've trapped.
On a word on that, you explained for a 6-year-old the notion of rocket science, but the high school, beginning college kind of notions that explains rocket science is quite simply, again, to Newton, every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
But it has to have it on something, and that's the point. And the point is if you don't have the confined space of the nozzle, you have nothing to have the opposite reaction on. There's no surface. So the problem with the retard not understanding rockets was he wasn't understanding that that's the impact is still there. You don't need a wall at the end of the nozzle because you're already hitting a slanted surface. The slanted surface is the same thing. It's collecting the force and it's going the only way. It's rigid. It won't yield this way. So the only way the force has to travel through it and go that way. So it's collecting force going this way or this way, and it's converting it into force going this way. So I understand the fucking high school version, fucking patronizing cunt. I was talking to an idiot who doesn't think rockets work, you stupid cunt.
Yeah, if you eject something, It doesn't matter whether it's pushing off something. The fact that you rejected it, it gives you a force the other way. You can intuitively read it.
Right, but that doesn't have anything to do with getting to the point, right? You could just say that just expelling the hydrogen gas out of the nozzle would create some opposite reaction. We're talking about the opposite reaction of the explosion. You have to account for the explosion. When the explosion happens, it's not in the spaceship anymore. It's not anywhere connected to the spaceship anymore. It's not in the oxygen tank. The explosion happens outside of the ship. So it's a little more complicated than saying the ship exploded. No, the ship expelled gases that exploded right next to it inside of a fucking nozzle. And the nozzle converted it into the momentum. The opposite reaction. Shit.
Reason that you've got the expansion going on, giving the velocity of ejection from the cup, and there's an equal and opposite reaction, but it's the principle of equal and opposite reaction that is the more technical insight in.
I'm saying that's not the more technical insight. Actually, that's the dumber insight, in the sense that you're still got to account for the real reaction. It's the ship's reaction to an explosion happening right next to it. That's all it really is. An explosion happened right next to the ship. That's the opposite reaction. And it would be more efficient if you could put a brick wall next to it. If you could get back some of that stuff that went that way. Because some of the stuff, a lot more stuff went that way, technically, in a way, than the ship can actually capture going this way. It did lose. It's not the most efficient thing on Earth.
Into why rocket science works. So no inertia, no momentum, all that stuff points to trying to describe what's going on structurally. And
no inertia, no momentum. So again, I didn't say that. I said that about electrons. Electrons, electrons, electrons. I made it clear I was talking about electrons. I never extended the conversation to atoms and everything else, and I've made arguments, obviously, about things having momentum and flying through space forever, and I do the wrench analogy. So this whole idea that you can create a reasonable straw man that I at any point argued that Newton's first law doesn't apply to material objects is just so fucking unfucking fair.
When you're held to account on that, you don't want to, it's fine, but you can't do both. You just have to say, that's not within the remit of my problems.
So again, he's giving me a lecture when I never did what he said I did. Never happened. I never was confusing to anybody paying the slightest bit of attention. There could no possible way of there being any confusion. For fuck's sake, we're talking about space shuttles and rockets. Obviously, I'm not denying Newton's laws when I did that. So it's just an insanely bogus straw man.
Just stick to your forces. And if you have
I can't just stick to my forces because the universe is made out of matter and forces. So I have to talk about what the matter is doing. And the point is to point out that the little nuclear bits aren't quite exactly the same as the atomic bits, because the atomic bits have stuff in between the nuclear bits, the subatomic bits. The electrons and protons have things between them. That's what makes an atom, is the extra force.
When, let's say, gravity delivers gravity, it delivers Newtonian gravity. That's force equals mass times acceleration. Yeah, and
not entirely, in the sense that, again, Newton's equation calculates both the masses and makes the mistake of not recognizing emitters of gravity, so to speak, are different than receivers of gravity.
Force between two gravitational objects is mass 1, mass 2 times gravity divided by the square of the distance.
And again, that's just saying how much each thing is capable of producing in terms of contributions to the gravity equation. that will cause attraction, but that doesn't really account for the real effect, which I am saying is calculated based on how dark the shadows are. How much force has been absorbed from the field, going the exact opposite directions. One thing absorbed force going this way, one thing absorbed force going this way. That's,
not Archimedean force notions. And that's another problem, is that's...
Now, I'm sure it's not another problem, because again, it's being premised on false premises.
Within, if you try to describe the structure in terms of the constituents, the external constituents, you end up, it is a completely larger domain of complexity, and there's a lot can go wrong, and that's part of the problem.
Well, something wrong.
Current physics, as it's got its set of problems, sure, but
so that's one of the favorite lines, right? Current physics is wacky and crazy and phantasmagorically crazy and wacky and crazy, but I like it. That's all. Yeah. Fuck reality. Just play in your little sand pile of whatever, virtual fun balls.
The naive, simplistic problems which arise out of that are there, the pitfalls are there when you try to envisage the same constituents on the outside living on the inside of the particle, and this notion of the transmission of identity and whatever you say.
I never said anything like transmission of identity, I don't think, but anyway, let's say I did. It's reflections. It's the transmission isn't by some vapor. Anything that's going to happen, it's going to happen because something had to hit something. There's no free get it. You have to get it because you got punched with it. Been clear about that. No entanglement woo anywhere near what I'm doing.
All the problems which are arising when you talk about structure. So you can't have it both ways. You can't talk about the structure on the one hand, the travelling identities, the needing to be pushed.
Needing to be pushed. I never would say anything like that. So again, anytime I use the word, like even the universe seeks balance, I qualify it now and I say, look, I'm not saying it's seeking it. I'm just saying the tendency is that the forces will oblige balance. I do that shit now all the time. I qualify the statement so jackasses like you can't play this silly game.
Where, the explanation of breaking clocks and the dancing analogy is again to talk about the structure, but because of the difficulties arise, it's just a line of inquiry and an intuitive, appealing answer for why time in a